Today I'm talking to novelist and editor Stacy Juba. One of the things she's noticed in her editing career is that many manuscripts came to her before they were ready to be edited. I wondered what she meant by this, and so she agreed to have a little chat with me and tell me why she thinks it's so important that writers learn to edit before they send their work to the editor. Let's find out more. Welcome to the Turning Readers into Writers podcast, where we teach beginner writers how to find the time and the confidence to write their first novel. I'm your host, Emma Desi, and I'm very excited that you're here. Thank you for joining me today, because if you've been longing to write your novel for forever, then this is the place to be. Think of this as your weekly dose of encouragement, of hand-holding and general cheerleading as you figure out how you're going to write your first novel. Trust me, as a mum of 3 young kids, I know how tricky it can be to tuck some time aside for yourself on a regular basis. And even when you do find that spare 5 minutes, you can feel so overwhelmed that no writing gets done. Trust me, I have been there, but this podcast is going to help you in practical ways, because once a week I'll be delivering an episode that gives you steps to building a writing routine, encouragement to build your confidence, and cheerleading until you reach the end. Okay, let's start. Stacy Juba has written sweet and sassy chick-lit novels, mysteries about determined women sleuths, and entertaining books for young adults and children. She has had novels ranked as number 5 and number 11 in the Nook store, and number 30 on the Amazon Kindle paid list. Her books include the Storybook Valley chick-lit series and the Hockey Rivals young adult sports novels. Stacy is also a freelance developmental editor, online writing instructor, and an award-winning journalist. She is the founder of Shortcuts for Writers, and her signature course, Book Editing Blueprint, a step-by-step plan to making your novels publishable, empowers fiction writers to think like an editor so they can save time and money. She also runs the Shortcuts for Writers Editing Made Simple group on Facebook. So welcome, Stacy. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
I wonder if we could just start with, if you could let the listeners know how you got started in writing.
I've been writing basically since I was in 3rd grade. So I was always a big reader, and I was very introverted growing up. So writing just helped to bring me out of my shell, helped me to express myself. I wrote a lot of mysteries when I was a child. And then when I was 16, I wrote a young adult hockey novel called Face Off, and I wrote it with the intention of entering it in this contest for teenage writers, and the winner would receive a publishing contract with a New York publisher. So I wrote the book and I sent it off, and then I found out my freshman year in college, I think it's the beginning of my freshman year in college, I found out that I had won. So then I started working with the editor and going back and forth on the whole editing and copy editing and book promotion. So it was really exciting, and that kind of solidified that I wanted to continue writing.
That must have been so exciting. What a thrill. I mean, it's like everybody's dream is to win a competition like that.
Yeah, it was so exciting. The day they sent me the cover, I think that made it really seem real. They sent me the cover of it was just like a close-up like of a hockey stick. It was the ice hockey novel, and it was just so exciting to see my name on the cover.
What an introduction. So we're on a few years now. You're no longer 16, but you still are a writer. And so how do you manage the writing life with your family life and any other kind of work that you do?
So my kids are a bit older now. They're teenagers. When they were younger, it was more challenging to juggle it all. Like when I was fortunate my parents lived nearby, so they would come and babysit, and I'd write work when I could. And I would do a lot of nights and early mornings before, when everybody was asleep. Then when they started going to school, then I would really take advantage of those hours, when they were out of the house. My not the best housekeeper. Things have to fall by the wayside, but
something's got to give.
Yeah, but I did make a lot of progress on my book, and now that they're older, they can entertain themselves a lot more. So I'll just tend to have more of a normal work day, like writing. I work from home with my editing and online teaching, so I'm able to just kind of work from home, and I just have so when I get up in the morning, I just start working, and I go to about 4:00, and then a lot of times I'm responding to emails or taking care of little tasks, like going on Facebook and talking to writers in my group and everything. Sometimes I'll be doing that at night, but for my actual sitting at my desk or sitting on my Chromebook working on projects, I tend to do that from about like 9 to 4.
Okay, well, that's a good chunk of the day, yeah. And so is that time divided between writing your own stories and doing the editing? Or so how do you balance that out?
It varies depending on what project I'm working on. Like right now I'm between books. So I'm kind of focusing on getting some more editing classes and different classes launched. So I'm working on writing the curriculum for those. But if I was working on a book, I would tend to do that first, because I find I'm most creative in the morning. So I would work on that till about lunchtime. And then after that, I would work on, editing and more like business stuff, like book marketing or that kind of thing, making videos or like YouTube videos or blog posts and that kind of thing. I tend to do that more like later in the day.
Right.
And then, when my kids are in school, like right now it's summer and then quarantine and everything, but when they were having a regular school day, my day would get broken up at about like 2:00, when I'd go pick them up. And, so I didn't have as long a work day as I do, now in the summer or when they were having a virtual school. So maybe like during that scenario, like that time of year, I'd be working more like 9 to 1:45, and then I'd come back, and once they were all settled, or if I drop them off at their activities and everything, then from about like 3:30 to 4:30, like I do as much as I could before making dinner. So it's a little more challenging, when we're busier, but I just do the best I can.
Exactly. Yes, totally. And so I'm interested, when you're writing your own fiction, what's your sort of objective for each writing slot? Do you kind of say a certain time allowance, or a certain number of words, or just a chapter or a particular scene? How do you break that down or chunk that down?
I tend to break it into scenes. Like I'll have a goal, like it's more, even though I might have a goal, like, I want to get this scene done, today, or write a whole scene in one day. It's more realistic that it would probably take me 2 or 3 days if it's a longer scene. So I always write with an outline, so I know what's coming next. And sometimes my outline will change as I'm writing, but I'm always, I'll update it. And I always write myself a little checklist on like a notebook or a sticky note or something, just to, so that when I sit down the next day, I'll know what's coming up next. So I just I'll have like a bullet list of things that are coming up in the scene. And a lot of times I will try to, like if I had some description or something that I wanted to be in a certain scene, I tend to do a lot of research to make my descriptions authentic. So, for example, my book Fooling Around with Cinderella, it's set at a theme park, so I did a lot of research on theme parks and castles at different theme parks, and I made myself a lot of notes on what might be on the walls, or the lighting, or just all different things. So sometimes, like in my scene, I'll just kind of, before I start writing it, I'll just paste all those random notes into the scene so that as I'm writing, I'm like, okay, now here's where I'm going to mention what's on the wall. So I'll go back and weave that in. So it sort of helps me to just kind of have all these little notes and everything, just so I know what's coming up. So I'll always make sure I have that set up like the day before, when I know what I'm going to be writing the next day, and I'll just kind of insert all my notes into it, and then I'll just try to put it all together. It's like putting together a puzzle,
Yeah.
Just kind of weave it all together, and then once I finish that, I'll kind of move on to the next scene and write my notes about what's coming up next and what do I need to paste into my document so I don't forget anything.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a nice process there. Each day you know how your writing session works, and you know how to prepare yourself for the next one. So it's really good. I do often think that when you're starting out, when you're a beginner writer, that's part of the battle, I suppose, is actually working out what your routine is and how you work best, and finding out how you can be most efficient in your own writing life. Yeah, so I love the idea of pasting in your research initially so that you have it there and you can just kind of pick out those snippets from the research that you've done and pop it into the right place. That's a nice idea. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I do that even with dialogue. If sometimes if I'm just thinking about the scene and kind of getting it ready to work on the next day, if there's random parts of dialogue come to my mind, I'll write that down, and I'll put that in, I'll pop that into my document, and then I'll just make it sound better.
Yeah, weave it in. Yeah. But you've made the transition into editing. So how did that come about for you?
Well, when my kids were younger, I was doing a lot of freelance writing. I was a journalist for several years before I had kids, and then I did that on the side, working for a parenting magazine and doing newsletters for different clients. And then when one of my newsletter clients was no longer doing a newsletter anymore, I had a big gap in my schedule, and I had recently been on some panels at a mystery writers conference, a regional mystery writers conference, and they also invited authors to do critiques. They would assign us 10 writers, and we would read their opening chapters and then sit down with them and do a critique session. And I really liked doing that. And I found that I liked meeting with the writers and giving them my feedback. So when I had this gap in my schedule, I decided I wanted to try doing something different instead of just doing more freelance writing. So I started marketing some freelance developmental editing services, and I just posted it in some different groups like on Facebook and Goodreads and the Kindle boards. It's called the K boards now. They had a place like Yellow Pages where you could post your services, and then writers started contacting me, and I found that I really enjoyed it, and I like doing developmental editing because I'm more about the creative process, and developmental editing is really looking at everything, like in the characters and the plot and the big things, as well as doing some line editing and the smaller things like word repetition, word choice, the scene, the flow of the scene, the dialogue. So I like doing all of that. I'm more interested in that than in doing the more kind of technical things like copy editing, being very precise with commas and proofreading. So I decided to specialize in developmental editing.
I see. Because now I know that sort of led into your book editing blueprint. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I did editing for about 5 or 6 years, and then I was finding that a lot of the manuscripts that were sent to me weren't really ready to invest in an editor. Editors can be very expensive because it's a very intensive process. It's very time consuming just sitting down with the manuscript and going over it with this fine tooth comb to be able to tell them everything that they need to work on, especially with the beginning writer, because there's so much that they need to learn. And I found that I was acting more like a writing coach and a personal writing instructor, more so than an editor. And a lot of these authors, beginning authors or maybe intermediate authors who might have self-published a couple of books, but we're still learning. We're still learning the process and developing their skills. I was finding that they needed a lot of rounds of editing. Like for a beginner writer, depending on their skill level, they might ideally need like 4 rounds of developmental editing, or they might need 8 rounds of developmental editing because they were just starting at like square one. Because editing can cost several $100s per round, but it just wasn't really realistic for most of them to publish a really strong book, because there was just so much expense involved developing their skills. And I found that I was also just seeing the same mistakes in manuscript after manuscript. And I even had like a copy and paste document on my on my computer where there was just so many of these repetitive mistakes, like telling rather than showing, or dialogue, using too many variations, like wind and brag, those kind of words, as opposed to just said or not enough. Like repetitive words, overused words like look and walk and smile. So many writers just use those kind of bland words on every page. So it really detracts from their voice. It just kind of makes their writing come across as more generic and not as vivid as it should be. So there was just so many of these mistakes that I was seeing in manuscript after manuscript, and I realized all beginning writers make the same mistakes. I remember making them myself. When I was editors used to tell me, like, I need to flesh out my characters more, and it took me a while, several years, to really figure out what that meant. So it's mistakes like that where the characters aren't as well rounded, to not really understanding what a scene is. Maybe having they'll have 7 or 8 pages where nothing happens. It's just all backstory and that kind of thing. So because the editing was so expensive, and because so many were making the same mistakes and just needed so many rounds of editing that they couldn't afford, I decided that creating a course would be a much better way of helping these writers, because it would be much less expensive than basically hiring an editor to be your personal writing coach for 5 rounds of editing, like hundreds of dollars per round. And it was just a more efficient and less overwhelming way of them to receive the information, because it's hard to compile when you're reading like a 300-page manuscript. And I would write notes on it also, using track changes. I also would take manuscripts like in the mail, so I'd mark up hard copies, and so there'd be a lot of writing, or there'd be a lot of comments,
Yes.
too. But that's really overwhelming to have so much all over your manuscript, all these markings, and then to try to boil it down to give them this writing lesson in like an 8-page letter. That's just a lot. And I found it's a much more efficient way of learning it if they can take a class and they can just go through like 10 modules, and there's some videos on every module is basically like focuses on like the mistake that I see writers make, like mistakes with character would be like in one module, like plot would be in another module, pacing. So I kind of put everything into different categories, like line editing and word choice and sentence structure. I put under the line editing section. So I basically, each module was just like this broad category of an area that I would see a lot of authors needing help with. So, so I found that this is just a much easier way for them to kind of digest all this information. They could listen to the videos, they could read the transcripts, and then I had some quizzes, interactive quizzes that they could take just to make sure they were getting it, to reinforce it. And then I have like a workbook that goes along with it, where they can go through the workbook and apply it to their own manuscript. So like if they're working on the character module, then they can look at their manuscript and evaluate their characters, and that kind of thing. And then at the end, there's like a 25-page checklist, basically going through everything that they should look at before they hire a developmental editor, because that's everything I would be evaluating. So I'm just teaching them how they can think like an editor and do those early rounds of editing themselves. And then once they've done that and they feel like they've come as far as they can on their own, or with critique partners, then it's time to hire an editor. And then it's time to really start investing in the manuscript. And hopefully that will cut down on a lot of that, make the process a lot less overwhelming and more streamlined.
Mm-hmm. No, it's an amazing tool that you've provided for people, because certainly from my own experiences of hiring an editor, that's exactly what they would go through, all those things, those modules that you've just mentioned. So if there's a tool out there that can help us address many of those issues up front, it will put us in. It means that when we do go to the editor, then we get more value out of them, and we can utilize their, your experience and your expertise that much better. Yeah. Oh, fantastic. It's something, especially pacing. I get asked about pacing as well, and that's always a tricky one, because I guess it varies from sort of book to book and novel to genre to genre, how the pacing works. Have you got any kind of maybe just one quick tip you could maybe give us here about pacing? Because I know that's something I get asked a lot about.
I say one big thing is look at your chapter endings, because a lot of authors, beginner authors, tend to just break off the chapter on a just very lackluster note. It's like it doesn't entice you to, like when you're reading a book and you get to the end of the chapter, and you're like reading at bedtime, and then you're like, okay, I got to read the next chapter. I just gotta see what's going on. You want to make sure that your chapter ending just kind of entices you to turn the pages. Not that it has to be a cliffhanger. You don't want to every chapter, doesn't have to be like a huge cliffhanger or anything like that. But you just have to kind of learn how to, end it on a stronger note, a more powerful note. Because a lot of authors just tend to end it just like on a mundane line of dialogue or something like that, and it just doesn't entice you to read the next chapter. And another thing is conflict. Make sure that your scenes have enough conflict, because that will really help the pacing. If nothing's really happening and everybody's getting along beautifully, then that's going to affect your pacing. It's just because the story's going to feel slow and like there's not much happening.
Oh, there we go. Two great tips there, actually, for the price of one for pacing. Thank you for that, Stacy. I wonder also, something I often ask the people I chat to is, do you have any books that you would recommend specifically for beginner writers? Is there anything that you've used in your writing life that has been really valuable?
There's one box that I recommend on Amazon I think she probably has it in print also. Mary Buckham I can't think of the name of the actual books, but it's about setting. It's basically about writing active setting. And that might even be the name of it, like writing active setting. But I recommend that to writers all the time, because so many authors, again, they tell rather than show, or they'll have very passive descriptions that just stop the theme with a lot of was and is and are.
Okay.
Or they'll describe things that are just really don't advance the story that much. They're just kind of mundane kind of things. Like if they're going into like a bedroom or something, they'll just stop the story and describe like the wallpaper and the, in the bed, but it's nothing really that advances the story or tells anything about the characters. It could be anybody's bedroom, it's not really revealing anything about the characters, or it's just very generic. So her books really help authors to write more vividly and more actively, and to really think about the details that they're including, like helping to make sure it reveals something about the characters, or or it's just the setting, to make it come alive. And she has a lot of examples that she includes from different published books. So it just kind of helps to drive home the point. Like if that's something you're having trouble with, it just really helps to illustrate. Sometimes by just reading really good writing and having it pointed out to you, then it can kind of make the light bulb click in your mind. Oh, okay, that's what I need to be doing more of.
Oh, cool. So that's Mary Buckham.
Yes.
I'll look her up and I'll put that in the show notes. So good tip. I've not heard of her before, so that's excellent. Learned something new. Yay. One thing that I've noticed a lot of beginners struggle with, and I certainly do still, I think, is worrying about, not being good enough, this idea of imposter syndrome that a lot of us struggle with. Is that something that you've ever struggled with or still do? And if so, how do you kind of overcome that and keep going, keep the motivation going?
I think that's something every author struggles with. Even when I started doing editing again, I was like, okay, do I have something to offer? And, it's just, you just have to dive in and, anything new like that, or, that you're trying to learn, or it feels like a risk, but you just got to have confidence in yourself and realize that this is something that really every writer has gone through, because it's a learning process. You just, with every book that you write, it'll get easier and easier, and you'll get stronger and stronger. And you might go back to one of your first manuscripts and read it and oh gosh, I've learned so much since then. And that's what you just have to look at it as a learning experience, like a path to learning. And you're not going to know everything up front. You're just going to get better and better. And you just have to devote yourself to, being open to that journey and realizing that you're going to go. The whole point is to grow as a writer. And, it can feel scary putting your work out into the world, sending it off to, I know so many authors when they send it to me, or if I see them like on Facebook saying, I just sent my book out to my editor or my beta readers, I'm so nervous what they're going to say. Just realize everybody feels that way. I still get nervous, like if I finish a manuscript and I give it to my husband or I give it to my parents, or, I give it to critique partners. I'm like, oh gosh. I've gone through it with my own editing checklist. I know the writing is good. I know overall it's good, but you don't know how people are going to react to your story. Are they going to connect with it? And, so it's a scary feeling. And then it can feel scary going on Amazon and, seeing the reviews. And you have to realize that no book is going to appeal to every reader. It's unrealistic to expect that you're just going to get like 4 and 5 star review. The goal is that's mostly what you'll get. But there's always going to be somebody that it just, they got the book and, they probably shouldn't, because they're not that crazy about that genre, or they got it when it was on sale. Like, I'll pay 99 cents for the book. And then, 6 months later, they're like, I don't like mysteries, or they're in a bad day when they post a review. So you just have to realize that everybody's going to get some negative reviews, even famous best-selling authors. If you really look at their reviews, again, most are probably 4 and 5 stars, but if you really look, they could have a couple hundred. If they have like 2,000 reviews, it's going to be some 1 and 2 star reviews. It's just, and you have to realize that, and you have to realize if you're sending your book out to an agent or a publisher, that you're most likely going to get some rejections, and it can be hard. I went through a lot of years of rejection between books, and it's hard, but you just have to realize that, accept it. That's part of the journey. And if there's a difference between writing as a hobby, writing for yourself, or and writing as a profession, and if you want to write and get paid for your writing, then you just have to realize that, there's just like a certain level and certain expectations that go along with it, and you can't take it personally. You have to develop a thick skin and to try to get over that imposter syndrome that you're not good enough, because, every author has gone through that. So you have to realize that, it's just normal. It's
normal. Yeah. So tell us, what are you working on now in terms of your own fiction?
I've been just doing some research. I have a file where I just kind of keep ideas. So I'd like to do a Storybook Valley Christmas like novella, and I have
Cool.
some. So my Storybook Valley series is a romantic comedy series set at a fairy tale theme park, and I have like ideas for different books, like where, right, the first book's fooling around with Cinderella, the second book's prancing around with Sleeping Beauty. So I have several titles, like with like Red Riding Hood and flying around with Peter Pan. I have all these titles, so it's a matter of deciding what I'm going to work on next. But I think the next one's going to be a Christmas novella because I just love Christmas, and with a theme park, I think I can. It's summer, but I think I can do something with like a Christmas in July kind of theme that would be fun to do. And then I'm also thinking about doing a third book of my hockey series. So I published the first one, Face Off, when I was 16, and then the second one I actually published a couple of years ago, as I wrote the sequel like 25 years later. Because the first one was still selling so well, I dug the sequel out of my drawer and gave it a rewrite, and they're both selling well. So I'm thinking about doing a third one. So I'm just kind of compiling and doing some research and playing with some ideas. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm just kind of putting ideas in my folder and seeing. I always get this feeling when I'm ready to start. So it's still gelling. Both of them are still gelling right now while I work on my doing some more courses, and then once I go back and start working on another book.
So I think that's a wonderful example. Your hockey books are a fantastic example of how, we create something and, it maybe takes us 12 to 18 months, say, to work on this, and then we publish it or we query it, and then we start moving on to the next project. But you've just shown us, your first hockey book, as you said, 25 years later, is still selling. It's still there. People are still reading it. People are still enjoying it so much that you wrote the sequel. And I think that's a lovely thing just to remember there for everybody. Whatever you create and put out into the world, it's there for a long, long time, and you'll be reaping the rewards and the benefits of that for a long, long time. And that's a wonderful thing, I think, to put out into the world. And that's the joy of being a creative, I think, is you're giving the world something for not just for the now, but for future generations as well. And I think it's wonderful. And then kind of on a more selfish point as well, as for us, it means that we'll still have a little bit of income coming in the future as well. And that's not to be sniffed at. That's a really nice thing to have. Yeah. So tell me, where can listeners find out a little bit more about you and your book editing blueprint?
So for if they want to find out more about my books, I have a stacyjuba.com website. And then if they're writers and want to find out more about my editing or my book editing blueprint, they can go to shortcutsforwriters.com. And then when they're there, they can look for my free 5-day line editing class, Line Editing Made Simple. If they sign up for that, they'll get several days of line editing tips emailed to them. And then I also have a group on Facebook, the Shortcuts for Writers Editing Made Simple group. So they can look that up also. There's a link to it on my website. And then there's just a few questions.
Wonderful. Well, I'll link to all of those in the notes as well. That's fantastic. And then just one last question that I like to ask everybody at the end is, how do you fill your creative well, so to speak? So how do you replenish your creativity?
That was something I had to learn over the years, because I used to have this tendency to just work and just force it. And then I find that I was exhausted all the time, and the ideas weren't flowing as well. So I had to give myself permission to take some time off. I find that like exercising, like going for a walk, really helps. I like doing yoga. I have different, over the years, I've gotten like little hobbies that kind of help me to relax, because I'm not one that can just sit and like do nothing. I always have to be doing something. So I have like crossword puzzles. I have like adult coloring books, games, like puzzles that you can do by yourself, that kind of thing. So I find that when I just kind of do that and just kind of occupy myself, so that I'm doing something, but like my mind is, I'm not just always working. It frees up my mind, so that later ideas will just pop into my head, or it just refuels me. I think it's important to kind of rejuvenate yourself and take time just doing things that you like. and don't feel guilty about it that I'm not working on my book, or I'm not working, because writing is such a creative process that you need to replenish the well, otherwise it's going to run dry. And I think that was something that was really hard for me to learn. So that would be my advice, is just, take a walk, do some, and don't feel guilty about it. Do something else that's creative, whatever you like to do. And just look at it as this is going to help your writing, and it's going to help ideas to flow to you.
Cool. Oh, that's lovely. Well, Stacy, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh, thank you.
Take care.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers, hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.